Eliminate them. Every last one. The enemy commander's voice carried no anger, no hesitation, only the flat certainty of a man who had already decided the math and found it acceptable. He stood at the edge of the tree line with his radio in one hand and his other hand raised, and behind him 60 rifles lifted in unison. 31 soldiers of Bravo Company had their backs against the collapsed wall of a border relay station that hadn't been operational in 11 years, and the open ground between them and any defensible position was 400 meters of nothing. Sergeant Dale Kepner screamed for a medic. That was the first scream. The second was for a sniper. Neither got an answer right away. Then, from the far end of the line, where the supply attachments and the support specialist had been keeping their heads down since the first mortar round, there was a sound that didn't belong to the firefight. Quiet, deliberate, the unlatching of a hard-shell case. The morning had started with fog. It always starts with something that doesn't feel like a warning. The fog over Ashmore Crossing had sat low since 0500, the kind that dulls sound and flattens distance, and makes soldiers feel briefly invisible in a way that is, of course, entirely false. Bravo Company had been holding the relay station for 9 days. Their original assignment had been a 72-hour security rotation before a scheduled handoff to a second unit. The handoff had been delayed twice. The third delay had arrived in the form of mortar fire at 618, which meant it wasn't really a delay anymore. It was a decision someone else had made for them. Corporal James Yoon had been on the Eastern Watch when the first round hit. He'd been making a note in his log about the fog, actually, the particular way it moved across the low ground north of the station, which he'd described in previous entries as interesting, and which he now understood was covering movement. He hit the ground before the echo cleared. He hit it already calling it in because 12 months in this kind of rotation wires, certain reflexes pass the point of conscious decision. Contact north, mortar fire, single round, eastern perimeter, stand by. The second round wasn't a single round. Sergeant Kepner had 23 seconds between the first impact and the second barrage to understand the scope of what was happening, which was not enough time to be comfortable with it, but was enough time to start managing it. He got his people moving to the interior position, a reinforced section of the old relay station's main structure, thick concrete, old rebar, the kind of thing that had been built when they built things to last, and that had spent the last 11 years being shot at by various parties without fully conceding. He counted heads as they moved. He got to 28 before the third barrage hit, and the count became unreliable. They set up in the interior. They distributed ammunition. Kepner did the math that every sergeant does in that situation, the math of rounds versus time versus how many people you're responsible for, and what the probability looks like that any of those numbers work out in your favor. The numbers he arrived at were not good numbers. The QRF he'd requested was 45 minutes out at minimum. The enemy force advancing from the north had numbers he estimated at 60 plus, moving in coordinated lines, moving like people who had done this before in other places. 3-1. Minimum. Staff Sergeant Renata Obi materialized at his shoulder with her rifle at her cheek and her eyes on the northern approach. "We need to do something about that machine gun," she said. There was a mounted position on the ridge at 250 meters, newly established. They hadn't had it at 067, which meant someone had moved it up during the barrage, using the noise as cover. Smart. Disciplined. The kind of thinking that made the math worse. "I know," Kepner said. "Do we have anyone who can reach that?" Kepner looked at his people. Infantry. Support specialists. A signal sergeant. 2 vehicle crew chiefs whose vehicles were already burning on the eastern approach. A logistics coordinator who had been attached to the rotation 3 weeks ago on what her transfer paperwork described as a temporary assignment pending redeployment. He had asked when she arrived whether she had combat experience. She had said, some. He hadn't pressed it because the paperwork listed her as a supply specialist, and because the first 3 weeks had been quiet, and because people who say some and then go quiet usually mean they're being modest or they're being careful, and he hadn't had reason to determine which. Her name was Warrant Officer Claire Devereaux. She was 31 years old. She had spent the 3 weeks at Ashmore Crossing doing exactly what her paperwork said she should be doing: inventory, logistics coordination, supply chain documentation. She had eaten her meals without complaint. She had taken her watches without being asked twice. She had not volunteered opinions in the morning briefings, and had not drawn attention to herself in any way that Kepner had registered until this moment, when the sound of the case unlatching made him turn. "Is there a designated shooter here?" he called. "Anyone with long-range qualification, speak up now." Silence from his left, silence from his right, and then the sound of a bipod being extended. Devereaux was on one knee at the back of the position. The case was open beside her. Inside it, broken down, and now being assembled with the kind of hand speed that doesn't come from reading a manual, was a C-14 Timberwolf, a Canadian-manufactured .338 Lapua Magnum precision rifle that had no business being in a supply specialist personal kit and every business being in the hands of whatever Devereaux actually was. The position went quiet. Even Obi stopped talking. Even the radio went quiet for about 4 seconds, which on a radio in an active engagement is a very long time. Kepner walked to her. He watched her seat the barrel, lock the receiver, attach the scope, a Schmidt & Bender, the kind you don't issue, the kind you source yourself if you know what you're looking for and have had long enough to look. Each movement was locked in. No variance, no pause. The movements of someone who had done this particular thing until the hands remembered it, without the brain needing to intervene. "Devereaux," he said. "Sergeant." She didn't look up. "Where did that come from?" "My kit." She slid the bolt home with a sound like punctuation. "It's been in the supply manifest under specialist equipment. Section 3, row 7. No one checked. And you know how to use it." She looked at him then, not a long look, just the brief, frank assessment of someone deciding how much context was necessary for the next 60 seconds. Her eyes were gray and completely level, and carried in them the particular quality of someone who had already made all the relevant calculations and was waiting for the situation to confirm them. "Yes," she said. "How confident are you on that ridge position?" 250, crosswind, partial cover. She was already looking through the scope. "The wind is 9 knots and shifting," she said. "There's a thermal layer building off the low ground. It'll affect the read at anything past 300 in about 4 minutes. I want to take this before that happens." A pause. "I see 2 operators on the gun and a spotter at 8 o'clock from their position." Kepner stared at her. "Take the shot," he said. What followed was the most compressed and educational 40 minutes of Kepner's career, and he had been having a career that did not lack for compression or education. He had worked alongside designated marksmen on 2 previous deployments. He knew the craft, respected it, understood in the technical sense what it required. He knew about wind holds and elevation corrections and the way distance folds into a calculation that needs to be performed faster than most people can perform anything. What Devereaux did was something adjacent to that, and also something considerably past it. She didn't simply shoot. She read. She read the battlefield the way you read a system, the way an engineer reads a schematic, or an analyst reads a data set, looking not at the individual components, but at the relationships between them, the points of load and tension, the places where a single change would propagate outward and alter the behavior of the whole. She identified the machine gun first, which was the instinctive target, and then immediately deprioritized it in favor of the eastern flanking element that Kepner hadn't registered as the greater threat yet, because the eastern flanking element, if it reached its objective, would put Bravo Company in a crossfire that no amount of interior positioning could resolve. She shot the point element of the eastern flank. Then she moved to their communications operator, not by rank insignia, which wasn't visible at this distance, but by the antenna pack. Then she paused. Kepner watched through his binoculars and saw what she saw. Both flanks had frozen, not retreated, frozen. Looking for the source of fire, confused about the geometry of what was hitting them, she had bought 30 seconds. She used them on the northern main body. 4 rounds in 12 seconds, measured, each one placed with an intention that wasn't about casualty count so much as about shape. The way the advance was structured, where the momentum lived, which points, if disrupted, would cause the whole line to hesitate. The advance stopped. "She's not shooting at them," Obi said from beside Kepner. Her voice had a quality he hadn't heard in it before. She's editing the battlefield." "I see that. Who is she, Dale?" Kepner didn't answer, because Devereaux was speaking. Sergeant, they're going to push a second mortar team forward. 40 seconds, maybe less. Southeast corner, they've been moving it through the scrub. You can track the disturbance in the brush line if you know the baseline. A pause. I can reach it. Kepner looked at the scrub. He saw nothing but scrub. What's your confidence? She didn't answer for 2 seconds. He was already learning to read her silences. This one was the silence of someone performing a very fast internal calculation that she was choosing not to narrate. Confident enough, she said. One shot. From the scrub line, the sound of something metallic toppling. Then voices in a language Kepner didn't speak but whose register he understood perfectly. Surprise, followed immediately by fear. Corporal Yoon, from his position 5 meters to the left, made a sound that came out halfway between a laugh and something that wasn't a laugh. She shot through the brush, he said. Did she just? Is that what happened? Eyes on your sector? Kepner said, automatically. But his hands were not entirely steady. During the lull, a brief repositioning while the enemy regrouped, Kepner moved to where Devereaux was checking her rounds. She counted them with the focused economy of someone who never wastes motion. He crouched beside her. You're going to tell me something, he said. That's a broad request, she said. Start with the Timberwolf in the supply manifest. She was quiet for a moment. The logistics assignment was a cover. I was between postings. Cover for what? She looked at him. The gray eyes, the absolute steadiness in them. Precision Intelligence Unit, she said. PU. The words landed with weight. Kepner had heard of PIU the way most people in his position had heard of it, obliquely, in fragments. The way you hear about a program that is almost certainly real, and also officially isn't. Long range, high value, the kind of work that appears in no after-action report because it was never officially assigned. The kind of work that requires a particular combination of mathematical ability, patience, and the specific psychological profile of someone who can be completely alone inside a decision that has permanent consequences. PIU was defunded, he said. Programs are defunded, she said. Skills aren't. He looked at her. How long? 6 years active. She picked up her rifle, settled back into position. 2 years in administrative posts. Logistics is good cover. Nobody thinks to look at the supply chain until now. Until now, she confirmed. He almost said something else. He didn't, because the radio crackled and the second push began. The second push was harder, better coordinated. The flanking elements moved faster and with tighter synchronization, and the main body pushed under suppressive fire that kept Bravo's people from returning fire effectively. 2 of his soldiers were grazed. Obi took a round to her plate carrier that knocked her sideways and left her winded but operational. Ewan's radio took a hit that rendered it useless, which meant command communications now ran through a single device. And into all of it, Devereaux worked. She had repositioned to a secondary firing point without being told, one that gave her a better angle on the northern approach while maintaining partial cover from the east. She was managing her rounds with a selectivity that Kepner found, the more he watched it, genuinely remarkable, not firing at everything threatening, but at the specific things that, if not addressed, would collapse the defensive shape. The signals operator coordinating the eastern advance. The forward element of the northern push, at the moment it was most exposed, crossing a 15-meter section of open ground. A second gun that had been moved up under the cover of the suppressive fire and had not yet engaged. Each removal changed the structure of the attack. Bennett slightly introduced hesitations that accumulated into disruption. She's thinking in systems, Obi said. She was back beside Kepner, a field dressing on her left arm that she'd applied herself without stopping. She's not responding to the attack. She's changing the attack. Yes. How do you learn that? Kepner watched Devereaux settle into stillness. The particular quality of her stillness, the way her body found a kind of rest that wasn't rest, that was more like a state of complete organization. You don't learn it, he said. You become it. The second push broke at a 712. The enemy withdrew to the tree line to regroup. 22 minutes until QRF. Kepner moved to Devereaux in the brief lull. She was checking her rounds. How are you holding, he said. The question surprised her. He could see it in the fractional pause, the small recalibration of someone who had been asked something that wasn't in the operational register. My right wrist has been compensating since round 38, she said, pre-existing strain from a previous deployment. It's manageable. How manageable? Enough. The word had a particular quality, not a ceiling, but a precision. The exact amount required, no more than that, and she would not tell him otherwise. When this is over, he said, we are going to have a conversation. She looked at him. Something shifted in the line of her face. Not a softening, exactly, but a reduction in the operational compression she'd been wearing since she opened the case. I'd like that, she said, and the way she said it was different from the way she'd said everything else. Then the radio crackled. The third push was coming. The third push was the worst, and it came with armor. 2 light vehicles, wheeled, not tracked, moving up the northern approach with infantry mounted and dismounting on the move. The vehicles couldn't be stopped by the Timberwolf at a direct angle. Kepner did the math. The math did not resolve. Devereaux was already tracking left, away from the vehicles, away from the infantry. She was tracking to a position on the elevated ground behind the main advance. A figure with a radio, moving in the deliberate, careful way of someone who was directing rather than fighting. The forward coordinator, the person managing the timing between the vehicle push and the infantry advance. Without that coordination, the elements would arrive asynchronously. They would still hit, but not together. She fired. The third push lost its timing within 90 seconds. It didn't stop. The elements kept coming, kept pressing, and the firefight at the station perimeter became close and loud and intimate in a way that long-range work never is. Kepner's people held. Yuan took a hit to his shoulder that should have put him flat and didn't, because Yuan was 23. And from Sudbury, Ontario, and apparently not yet finished with being present. Corporal Isabo Nkrumah, who was technically a vehicle mechanic and who had been operating as a rifleman since 0630, called a target adjustment for the soldier beside her with a steadiness that Kepner registered as one of the best pieces of leadership he'd seen in a long time. Devereaux had 4 rounds remaining when the third push began to break. Kepner moved to her. 4 rounds, he said. Yes, she was already scanning. QRF is 12 minutes out. I know. She lowered the rifle slightly to look at him directly. The ridgeline at the northern approach. Elevated position, partial cover, line of sight on every approach vector for 400 meters in 3 directions. If someone was up there when QRF arrives, they could direct the incoming on targets before they're even in range. Kepner looked at the ridge. He knew what she was going to say before she said it. No, he said. It gives us a 12-minute advantage that changes the probability of everyone currently in this position walking out of it. It's exposed on 3 sides and you have 4 rounds. 4 rounds used well is not the same as 4 rounds. She held his gaze with the same level gray attention she'd brought to every calculation that morning. Sergeant, I know what this position costs. I've held harder ground. He believed her. He hated that he believed her, and he believed her anyway. Radio stays on, he said. You give me everything you see. The moment that position becomes untenable. I know, Devereaux. He said her name the way you say a name when you mean something larger than the name. You come back. She held the rifle. She looked at him for a moment, a single genuine moment that wasn't operational, that belonged to something quieter and more exposed. That's the plan, she said. She moved to the ridge. Behind her, 31 soldiers watched her go. Yoon with his good hand half raised, Nkrumah with her jaw set, Obi, who had been in the military for 14 years and had seen things, watching with an expression that Kepner couldn't fully parse, except to note that it wasn't any version of doubt. The ridge was 40 meters of open ground and then a scramble-up broken terrain, and Devereaux covered it in 22 seconds using every fold in the landscape. Moving low and fast in the particular way of someone whose body understood cover as a language, she reached the elevated position, a natural outcrop, partial cover on 2 sides exposed to the south, and she established her sightlines in 4 seconds and put her eye to the scope and started talking. Northern approach. Main body has reorganized. 3 elements, looks like they've split the western flanking force into 2 smaller groups. Faster movement, harder to track sequentially. A pause. They've learned from the first 2 pushes. They're adapting. Kepner confirmed. He moved his people. Counter-sniper, she said. East Ridge Line, 580 meters. Established before the third push started, He anticipated an elevated position, a shorter pause. He doesn't know it's me. Does that matter? Kepner asked. Yes, she said, because I'm going to let him think he has the shot first. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Devereux, I've done this before, she said. The number of times I've done it is why I'm still here to tell you about it. What she did next was difficult to describe from the ground and was, Kepner later understood, a piece of applied psychology as much as marksmanship. She moved into a position that a trained observer watching through a scope would read as a shooter exposing herself. The angle of the barrel past the cover edge, the silhouette shift of someone settling into firing position. She made herself legible. She made herself look like exactly the problem the counter-sniper had been assigned to solve. She waited. The round hit the rock face 6 centimeters to her left. Stone chips crossed her cheek like a fast, cold hand, and in the fraction of a second between his trigger pull and the impact, she had already moved. Rolling right, finding a new position, the Timberwolf tracking to the place on that distant ridge where a man who had just fired would still be committed, still extended, still inside the physiological reality of a shot that hadn't redirected him yet. She fired. Counter-sniper neutralized, she said into the radio. Her voice had the exact same quality it had carried all morning. Western element at 380 meters. Moving fast. Suppressive fire on my mark. North-northwest, 25 meters left of the fence line remnant. 3, 2, 1 mark. Bravo Company opened up. The Western element crossed open ground at the wrong moment and folded at the front and went to ground and lost the momentum that had made it dangerous. Devereux put 2 rounds into the Eastern Prong's lead element and 1 round into the main body's new coordinator. She'd been identifying him for 10 minutes, tracking the moments of timing change, mapping the delays back to a single source on the high ground, and the 4th push came apart. Not because every threat was eliminated, because the timing that held the threats together was gone. They're breaking off, Kepner said into the radio, something in his voice that hadn't been there an hour ago. Not relief, something closer to disbelief resolving into acknowledgement. Western element pulling back, main body going to cover. Eastern prong is still moving, she said. 2 shots. Rapid, not rushed. The eastern prong stopped moving. On the perimeter, Yuen made a sound. He grabbed Nkrumah's arm and said something that Kepner didn't catch. Nkrumah looked at the ridge and said something back. Neither of them said it loudly, but the sound of it carried anyway. The particular sound of people who have been very afraid for a long time and are only now allowing themselves to notice. Ammunition count, Kepner said. 2 rounds remaining, Devereux said. A beat. QRF is 8 minutes out, he said. I know. I can see their approach vector from here. I need you to know something. She paused. The commander of this formation, the one who called the initial order, he has a command vehicle staged at the back of the northern formation. Wheeled partial cover, communicating by radio. That vehicle is what's been coordinating the timing between all 4 elements. Kepner waited. If that vehicle moves forward to re-establish contact after what I just did to their coordination, it has to cross 40 meters of open ground to reach its next covered position. Another pause. I'll have approximately 4 seconds when it moves. 2 rounds, Kepner said. Yes. At what range? From my current position, 590 meters. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. He opened them. Are you telling me you can make that shot? I'm telling you I've made that shot. In worse conditions, with a compromised position and less preparation time. She was quiet for a moment. What I need from you is a 2-second warning when the vehicle moves. Whitmore on command channel should have thermal. Ask him to watch the vehicle's position and call movement. Kepner got on the command channel. Whitmore confirmed thermal coverage. They waited. The wait was 53 seconds. The vehicle moved. Moving, Whitmore said. Devereux fired. The vehicle stopped in the middle of its crossing. Engine gone, communication suite offline, stationary in 40 meters of open ground with no cover in any direction. The commander of the formation that had spent 3 hours trying to kill 31 people was still in the vehicle, alive, but no longer directing anything. Confirmed hit, Whitmore said. Then, after a pause, Alpha, what is your shooter's designation? Kepner looked at the ridge where a logistics specialist from a supply rotation had just put a round through a command vehicle at 590 meters with 2 rounds left and a strained wrist. "She's ours," he said. The last 2 rounds went to work the way the first 81 had gone to work, with precision and intention, and the particular economy of someone who understood that the round that mattered most wasn't the one you took, but the one you chose not to take and saved for the moment that required it. 1 round disrupted the final coordinated push before it could synchronize. 1 round, 20 seconds later, went through the radio antenna of the secondary coordinator who had stepped into the command vacancy, not the man, the antenna, because the man alive and confused was more disruptive to his own formation than the man dead and replaced. A small technical choice that produced in the next 90 seconds more operational impact than a casualty count would suggest. Then Devereaux was empty. "I'm out," she said into the radio. Her voice had the same quality it had carried all morning. It was Kepner, who registered the weight of those 2 words differently now than he would have registered them 5 hours ago. "QRF is 4 minutes out. He's hold your position. You've bought us what we needed. The ridge is still useful for visual on the approach." Devereaux. A pause. "You've done enough," he said. And the way he said it was not an order. It was something quieter than that. "Come back." She came back. She crossed the 40 meters with an empty rifle and a wrist that had stopped pretending it was manageable. And she hit the interior perimeter and went to one knee behind the nearest cover and stayed there. Obi was beside her in seconds, the medic's hands already moving, finding the wrist, already saying something about grade 2 strain, and since when, exactly in the tone of someone who already knew the answer was going to be annoying. "Since round 38, Devereaux said. "You fired 43 rounds after round 38, Obi said. 44. And you didn't. It was manageable." Obi made a sound. It wasn't a word. She kept working. Ewan appeared above Devereaux's sightline. He looked at her with the expression of someone who had used up every emotional category they possessed and arrived somewhere on the other side of all of them. He was 23 years old, and he had Sudbury behind him and a shoulder wound that was going to need imaging. And he looked at this woman who had held a ridge with an empty rifle and fought her way back, and he didn't say anything for a moment because there wasn't a category for it. "Hey," he said finally. "Hey," she said. "I'm Ewan, James Ewan." "I know," she said. "I've been listening to you on the radio since 0618. He almost smiled. "You know what I mean." She looked at him. "Devereaux, Claire Devereaux, from nowhere in particular." He nodded once. He moved back to his position. And Kepner, who had watched it, filed it in the place where certain things get filed, the moments that don't belong to the official record, but that are more true than anything in the official record. The QRF arrived at 0841. The formation broke. The firing stopped. The silence was absolute and sudden, the way silence always is after sustained noise, like a room after a door slams. The absence of the thing is almost louder than the thing itself. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Obi said quietly, to no one in particular, "Is that it?" It was a statement, not a question. She'd been in long enough to know what the end of a firefight felt like. 29 soldiers were standing. 2 had been evacuated earlier, both stable. Nobody from Bravo Company had been killed. The number felt, for a moment, impossible. The way certain numbers feel when they're better than the math should have allowed. Kepner found Devereaux sitting with her back against the interior wall, the empty rifle across her knees, her eyes on the middle distance. Not vacant, she was still processing, still running the internal accounting that the body demands after it's been operating past its design parameters for 3 hours. He sat beside her. 29, she said. He understood immediately. It wasn't a puzzle. 29, he confirmed. She nodded once. A very small thing, but he noted it. The way certain people receive good news, not with relief, because relief implies you were uncertain, but with the quiet acknowledgement of someone who had been holding a weight and was now doing the deliberate work of setting it down correctly. "There's going to be a debrief," he said. "I know. A significant one. I know that too." She looked at her hands. The right wrist was wrapped now, Obi's compression work, clean and professional. She rotated it slightly, testing the range. The PIU designation is going to complicate the paperwork. Probably. People are going to want to know who I am. People already do. He looked at her sideways. Whitmore asked twice. She almost did something with her face. Not quite a smile, not quite not. Tell him she's logistics, she said. I don't think that's going to work anymore. No, she said. I don't think it is either. The medevac came for 3 of the wounded, including Yoon, whose shoulder required imaging, and whose insistence that he didn't need it was overruled by Obi in the particular way that medics overrule things. Not loudly, just finally. He was at the loading door when he turned and looked back across the interior position to where Devereaux was still sitting against the wall. He raised one hand, not a wave. The gesture of a person saying, I see you, I know what this cost. You did the thing that needed doing, and I am not going to forget that. She raised her good hand back. Kepner was beside her for the walk to the command vehicle that would take her to the forward base for the debrief. He walked without being asked, because the wrist was genuinely not cooperating with the terrain and because there was no operational reason to pretend otherwise anymore. The official report, she said. What are you going to put in it? The truth, he said. All of it. The PIU history. All of it, he said again. You held this position. It goes on the record. She was quiet for a moment. They walked. There was a soldier, she said. Her voice changed in the small, particular way that voices change when they reach something they've been carrying. My last PIU deployment, before the administrative posting, my spotter. His name was Marc Tremblay. He was from Quebec City. He was 27 years old. She paused. He died on the extraction from our last operation, not in the field. In the extraction vehicle, on a route that 3 members of the intelligence staff had flagged as compromised, and the flag had been overridden by someone managing a timeline. Kepner said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. He knew this. He honored it by staying quiet. I filed a report, she said. Full documentation, every flag, every decision point, every place where a different call would have produced a different outcome. I signed it and I submitted it and, she paused. Nothing happened. Is that why the administrative posting? I needed to do something where I could see what I'd done at the end of the day. Something with weight I could measure. Boxes moved, manifests completed. She looked at the road ahead. Nothing that followed me home, but it followed you anyway. It always follows you anyway. She said it without bitterness, as a fact. What PIU training gives you is the ability to function inside situations that should be psychologically impossible. What it doesn't give you is the ability to stop thinking about Tremblay at 2 in the morning when there's nothing else demanding your attention. Kepner walked with that for a moment. He should be in the after-action report, he said finally. Not as a footnote, as part of the context. The person who was there before you, who shaped how you do what you do, who is connected to the reason this debrief is going to go the way it's going to go. She looked at him. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She was quiet. Something shifted in the quality of the silence between them. Not softening, something more deliberate. The shift of a person who has been holding something at a particular tension for a long time and is allowing carefully the tension to change. Thank you, she said. 2 words, direct and complete. At the vehicle door, the command staff took over. Kepner stepped back. He watched the vehicle move and kept watching until it was smaller than a point and then gone. Obi appeared at his elbow. Is she going to be all right, Obi said. Kepner looked at the empty road. Yeah, he said. He believed it entirely, which surprised him slightly. That level of certainty usually took longer than 3 hours to build. But Ashmore Crossing had been a compressed education. She is. 4 days later, he sat in a hospital corridor in Germany with a debrief folder on his knee and a coffee gone cold. The debrief had been, as predicted, significant. People without visible rank insignia had asked careful questions and noted the answers with the particular neutral attention of professionals who had been doing this long enough to stop showing reactions. He had answered everything accurately. He had included Marc Tremblay's name in his written statement, and the context of the extraction and the flagged route and the override. He had been told this information was outside the scope of the current debrief. He had told them he understood and included it anyway. Her door was at the end of the corridor. She was sitting up when he came in, left arm in a proper sling, the compression already replaced by something more clinical. She looked better than she had at the station. She also looked like someone who had been awake since before the staff thought she should have been awake, which was consistent. How's the wrist, he said. Grade 3 strain with ligament involvement, she said. Surgery this morning. 6 weeks of physiotherapy before I'm cleared for anything resembling field work. She looked at the sling. The surgeon asked me how long I'd been aware of the injury. What did you say? I said I'd been aware of a pre-existing strain. She paused. That is technically accurate. He almost smiled. What did they tell you? That I need to stop making grade 3 strains worse with sustained precision fire. She set down the water cup. And that I'm fortunate the damage isn't permanent. Good advice, terrible timing. The honesty of it landed between them, acknowledged and set aside in the same moment. The people who came to see you, she said, what did they actually want? He put the folder on the bedside table. They want to know if PIU should be reconsidered. There's been a review. She was quiet. The program's operational record, he said. What happened at Ashmore Crossing apparently gave someone in a room above my access level the argument they needed to make a case. He paused. They're going to offer you something. I don't know the exact shape of it, but it's coming. I know. She looked at the window. The light was the late afternoon kind, long and angled, the light of days that have lasted longer than they should. What I told them about Tremblay is going to be part of whatever they build, or you don't sign anything, he said. She looked at him. You told me his name should be on the record, Kepner said. I put it on the record. Whatever comes next, he comes with it. She held his gaze for a long moment. The gray eyes, that absolute level attention, and in them, something that the morning at Ashmore Crossing had not put there, or had put there, and the distance from it was making visible for the first time. The thing about PIU, she said finally, is that it trains you to be still inside chaos. To function when functioning should be impossible. And it works. It genuinely works. She looked at the sling. What it doesn't prepare you for is the stillness when the chaos is gone. When you're logging inventory at 2 in the morning and the discipline that kept you alive has nothing to attach itself to. When you're very, very quiet inside a life that doesn't need the person you became. Kepner sat with that. I looked right through you, he said. 3 weeks. That was the point. It wasn't what you needed. She considered it, the full weight of the proposition without deflection. No, she said, probably not. A man came in, no insignia, careful posture. He looked at Kepner with the measured courtesy of someone who wanted to have the room to themselves. Kepner looked at Devereaux. She nodded slightly. He stood, went to the door. I'll be in the corridor, he said. He sat with the cold coffee for 27 minutes. He watched the hospital move around him. He thought about Ashmore Crossing with the particular quality of retrospection that only arrives after the adrenaline has cleared completely. The raw shape of what happened, stripped of the noise. He thought about Mark Tremblay. He thought about 29 people who were standing. He thought about a woman who had spent 2 years trying to become invisible and had spent 3 hours being the most necessary person in a burning relay station. When the man with no insignia came out, he said, "She'll want to talk to you." Kepner went back in. Devereaux was looking at the window. Full reactivation, she said. PU is being rebuilt under a revised structure. New command review chain. The override protocol that killed Mark, that specific failure, is being addressed, documented. With accountability. Is that enough, he said, a long pause. I told him it depends on whether Mark's name is structural in the new program. Not symbolic. Not a dedication line at the front of a manual. Structural, as in the incident that killed him is mandatory study for every PIU commander going forward. Named, not anonymized. What did he say? He said that's a condition he can agree to. She turned from the window. He also told me that what happened at Ashmore Crossing is going to be a case study, that it's going to be taught. Kepner looked at her. Mark should be in that case study, she said. The steadiness in her voice was deliberate, the kind that comes from having decided to be steady. His name, what it cost, what the people who do this work carry forward with them. She paused. I told him that was a condition, he agreed. Do you believe him? The longest pause in the conversation. Outside, the light was shifting to the deep blue that comes just before dark. I believe it enough, she said. Kepner understood the word. He'd understood it since the first time she'd used it at the station in answer to a question about her wrist, in answer to a question about a counter sniper at 580 meters. Not a limitation, a precision. The exact measure of what was actually known, held honestly, without inflation. Enough. He stood. He moved the chair back to the wall the way people move chairs when they're thinking about something else. Ewan asked about you, he said. First thing when I came back from the initial debrief, he wanted to know if you were going to be okay. Something moved across her face, he said. Kepner paused. This is a direct quote from a 23-year-old from Sudbury who is still working out how to say the large things. He said she kept us in the fight when there was no fight left. Somebody needs to make sure she's still in it too. The silence that followed was different from the others. Quieter at the edges. He's going to be good, she said. Ewan, he's going to be very good. Because of this morning. Because he watched something and it changed what he thinks is possible. She didn't answer immediately. She looked at the window, at the light going. I hope he carries the right thing, she said finally. What's the right thing? She thought about it the way she thought about range calculations, without shortcuts giving the question its actual weight. That it isn't about the absence of fear, she said. I was afraid this morning, multiple times. The counter sniper, the crossing, the last 2 rounds. She paused. Fear is information. It tells you what matters. The question is whether you let it make the decision or just inform it. A shorter pause. Mark knew that. He used to say the only thing braver than not being afraid is being afraid completely and acting anyway. That should be in the case study, Kepner said. She almost smiled. All the way this time. Small, brief, real. Maybe it will be, she said. 2 days later, Obi came, then Nkrumah, then 3 soldiers from the second watch rotation who hadn't been there for the worst of it, but who had heard enough to understand what they'd missed. They came without arrangement, without a visiting schedule, the way people come when they need to confirm with their own eyes that the thing that happened was real. And the person who made it happen is still present in the world. Yoon came on the 3rd day, shoulder in a sling that matched hers, which he mentioned with a careful casualness that suggested he'd noticed and decided it was worth acknowledging. He sat in the chair and looked at his hands and looked at the window and said, I've been trying to figure out what to say since the station. You don't have to say anything, she said. I know. He looked at her. 2 weeks you'd been with us. 2 weeks and you were basically a stranger. And you still. He stopped. Started again. You went up that ridge. You came down with an empty rifle and went straight back in. His voice caught slightly. For people who were basically strangers. You weren't strangers, she said. Not after the first hour. He absorbed that. He looked at the window. Tremblay, he said quietly. She went still. The name in the debrief, he said. Kepner told me a little. I read what I had access to. He paused. Is that why the administrative posting? Yes? He nodded slowly. He didn't push it. He sat with it the way someone sits with something they've been trusted with and intend to hold properly. I just needed you to know, he said. That we know. All of us. What you did, what it cost. He met her eyes. Tremblay's part of that too. Whatever you did up there, he's in it somehow. The training, the way you think, the way you held the line. He's in all of it. Claire Devereaux, who had held a ridge with a strained wrist and an empty rifle and carried a name for 14 months in the space that good soldiers carry names, looked at James Yoon and said nothing for a moment then. Simple. Direct. The whole weight of it. He left. Kepner came on the 4th day, the last before she transferred to a stateside facility for the continuation of her physiotherapy. He came without the folder. He came as Dale Kepner, who had shouted a desperate question into a firefight and received an answer that had changed the morning and would keep changing things. What are you going to do, he said. She looked at the sling, at the window, at the slow return of movement in the hand that was working its way back from a grade 3 strain through 6 weeks of physiotherapy that she had already begun mapping out in her head because that was how she was built. Physical therapy, she said, and then I'm going to make a decision I can live with. Not just survive with, he said. She looked at him, and this time the almost smile completed fully. Not just survive with, she said. Yes, he extended his hand, the deliberate thing. The soldier's acknowledgement between equals who have been inside something together and are marking the fact of having come out. She took it, firm, steady. It was an honor, Warrant Officer Devereaux, he said. Claire, she said. He nodded once. Claire. He left. She looked at the window. The day outside was doing what days do, moving through its last light, indifferent to what the day had held, indifferent to relay stations and empty rifles and the names of people who didn't come home. And she found, to her own quiet surprise, that the weight of the morning was not only heavy, it was also something else. Something that fit the way a familiar grip fits, the way a scope settles to the eye of someone who has been looking through it long enough that it knows them back. She started planning her physiotherapy schedule. She had always been in the supply manifest. She had always been here,